Intracranial dural venous sinuses, superior sagittal sinus. It lies between two layers of falx cerebri. The size of sinus becomes progressively larger as it passes backwards from crista galli to internal occipital protuberance. Superior sagittal sinus, inferior sagittal sinus, straight sinus, great cerebral vein of Galen, transverse sinus, sigmoid sinus, confluences of sinus, internal jugular vein, superior and inferior petrosal. Features: it is triangular in cross section, communicates with venous lacunae on each side, the sites of drainage of diploic and meningeal veins. Arachnoid granulations project into its lumen. Tributaries: superior cerebral vein, parietal emissary veins, small drain from nasal cavity, veins of frontal air sinuses. Emissary veins, superior sagittal sinus, diploic veins, arachnoid granulations, lacunae of superior sagittal sinus, subdural space, superior cerebral vein, perivascular space, virtual Robbins space around central branch of cerebral artery, falx cerebri, subarachnoid space, pia mater, arachnoid mater. Clinical: thrombosis of superior sagittal sinus, the spread of infection from dangerous area of face, scalp and diploid to the superior sagittal sinus may cause its thrombosis. The presenting clinical features of thrombosis are marked increase in intracranial pressure due to defective adsorption of CSF and delirium due to congestion of superior cerebral veins. Inferior sagittal sinus. It is a small venous channel present between two layers of the lower margin of falx cerebri. Inferior sagittal sinus. It ends by joining the great cerebral vein to form a straight sinus. It drains the lower part of the medial surface of each cerebral hemisphere. Straight sinus. The straight sinus, it lies in median plane within the junction of falx cerebri and tentorium cerebelli. Inferior sagittal sinus, superior sagittal sinus, falx cerebri, straight sinus, internal cerebral vein, great cerebral vein of Galen, internal jugular vein, sigmoid sinus, occipital sinus, transverse sinus, tentorium, hierophili. Begin continuation of inferior sagittal sinus, terminates left transverse sinus. Continuation of inferior sagittal sinus. Straight sinus is the continuation of inferior sagittal sinus, terminates at left transverse sinus as. Transverse sinus begins internal occipital protuberance, runs laterally between two layers of attached margin of tentorium cerebelli. Right transverse sinus is larger than left transverse sinus because right is the continuation of large superior sagittal and left sinus is smaller straight sinus. Right is the continuation of large superior sagittal and left sinus is a small straight sinus. Sigmoid sinus. Each sigmoid sinus is a direct continuation of transverse sinus. It is S-shaped. Its terminal part curves downward and the forward to the posterior margin of jugular foramen through which it passes to continues as internal jugular vein. Transverse sinus, sigmoid sinus, internal jugular vein. Tributaries: mastoid and condylar emissary vein, cerebral vein, internal auditory vein. Clinical: thrombosis of sigmoid sinus. The sigmoid sinus is separated from mastoid antrum and mastoid air cells only by a thin plate of the bone. The thrombosis of the sigmoid sinus is therefore secondary to infection of the middle ear or mastoid process. Further, utmost care should be taken not to expose sigmoid sinus during operations on the mastoid process. Occipital sinus. It lies between two layers of attached margin of falx cerebelli. The occipital sinus runs downward from internal occipital protuberance to posterior margin of foramen magnum. Cerebral venous thrombosis (CVT). Thrombosis of different sinuses and its symptoms. Superior sagittal sinus, motor deficit seizures, inferior sagittal sinus, motor deficit seizures, straight sinus, motor deficits, mental statistics changes, transverse sinus, headache, hypertemnion, cranial nerve palsies, internal jugular neck pain, cranial nerve palsies, cavernous sinus, orbital pain, chemosis, protosis, cranial nerve palsies 3 to 6, 3, 4, 6. Thank you.